I'm not excited to talk about the first topic we have to discuss, which is Vandy beating Alabama 40 to 35. 1 week after Alabama had the biggest win of their season to this date, they became the number one team in the country. They put on a dominant first half against Georgia, only to play pretty poorly the second half and have Georgia almost come back, but Alabama won that game. They beat the number two team in the country, and they were number one for all of 7 days before the second half Alabama team from the Georgia game showed up against Vandy, and they got beat by Vandy for the first time since 1984. I did not have that on my bingo card for the week. I actually did not watch the game. I looked at the schedule, saw we were playing Vandy. I thought it would be an easy win, so I was going to allocate that time to doing homework. And that just goes to show you that when in doubt, always watch college football because you never know what's going to happen. So I checked the score at halftime, saw Alabama was down by about 2 touchdowns, something like that at the time. Was nervous, but figured Alabama was a second quarter team, UGA game notwithstanding. We'll come back. It'll be fine. It was not fine. So Alabama lost, and they've fallen down to seventh. Vandy was not ranked going into that game, and they're not ranked right now. So I disagree with that. I think if you beat the number one team in the country, Vandy's currently 3-2 on the season. So I get it. Like SMU is 25 right now, and they're 5-1, but they also haven't beat a ranked team. So I think just by nature of beating the number one team in the country, Vandy should at least be 5 or 25 just for the week. Like give them their just due. But I watched the highlights of the game. I read the box score. I read some articles about it. And from what I saw, it was essentially just Alabama got hit in the chin pretty early. Milrow threw a really early interception, which is never a good way to get going. And they just played lethargically, and Vanderbilt just came out gunning and played like it was their Super Bowl, and they took chances that Alabama didn't. And it's kind of like Georgia in the second half of the Alabama game. They just kept taking chances, and those gambles kept paying off for Vandy. I mean, the story of the game to me, like I didn't watch it, but just looking at the box score, Vandy had the ball for 42 minutes of the game compared to Alabama, who possessed the ball for 17 minutes. If you dominate the ball like that, that just inherently leads to more opportunities to score than your opponent, unless the only reason you don't have a lot of possessions because you're just like going in and getting a touchdown immediately and giving the ball up. But they had 12 third down conversions to Alabama's 3. And those right there, that's the two stats of the game. I mean, if you can convert on third down and buy yourself more time, that is how you win football games. And ultimately, that's what Vandy did. They did it in the first half and made Alabama play catch up. And Alabama, for what it's worth, did kick it into gear at the end of the game, but there just wasn't enough time left on the clock for them to make anything of it. I mean, they were only down 5 at the end, so that very well, like, if they would have got the ball back, they could have came out on top, but their defense just did not get crucial stops. At, I mean, in that last possession, had they gotten a 3-and-out or a 4-and-out against Vandy, because, at that point, Vandy would have gone for it. I mean, they could have got the ball back with a minute left and tried to make something happen. I mean, given Milrow's arm, like maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't happen. He did manage to pull something off like that with Ricky Williams last week, but the defense just couldn't get the stop. And that's something that Kalen Dorr really needs to work on is, I mean, it's an intangible thing really more than it is talent because Alabama has talented defense because they've shown that from time to time, but for whatever reason, they just don't get the crucial stops when they need to. And you saw it against Georgia last week when Georgia started building momentum. Isaiah Thomas was talking about Reggie Miller one day, and I know I've told this story on the podcast before, but he said Reggie Miller is clutch, not in the way that there's like 2 seconds left in the game, you need to go ahead bucket, and you can give the ball to Reggie, and he'll win the game on a buzzer beater. Reggie Miller was that kind of clutch, but Isaiah Thomas said he appreciated Reggie Miller's clutchness because Reggie was the kind of player where if you were down 5 and you could see the momentum was starting to shift to the other team and they were about to break away, you could count on Reggie Miller to get a bucket just to keep you in the game and stifle the other team from building that momentum. That type of clutchness, I think, is more important than the game-winning Michael Jordan against Utah in 1998 type of toughness because it presents itself more often. And that is a type of clutchness that Alabama's defense just has not exhibited to this point in the season. And I would really like to see them show that. That clutchness where UGA is just pushing down the field constantly. And if we could just get a stop, stifle the momentum, and they just have not been able to do it. And it's one thing to fail to do that against UGA, but if you can't do that against Vanderbilt, then you've got bigger fish to fry because Alabama's still 7th. It's a 12-team playoff. If they hit the right steps the rest of the season and don't lose again, then they'll be a playoff team, and this is something they need to figure out before the playoffs get there. But I mean, you can't take for granted, though, that they will be a playoff team. If they lose to Vanderbilt, what's to say that they won't have bigger issues against LSU or Tennessee or Ole Miss when those games come up the docket? So, I mean, this is similar to UGA against Kentucky, except Alabama lost and UGA won. But hopefully this serves as a wake-up call because Alabama has not played great this season to this point. The only game I would say they played great was against Wisconsin. And they played great the first half against Georgia, but they couldn't maintain it. So there are serious weaknesses with this team that needs to be addressed or at least alleviated to the extent that they can. And a lot of people, were saying this would have never happened under Nick Saban's watch. If Saban were here, he would have whipped them into shape. That's just not true. Nick Saban wasn't able to mitigate the damage when Alabama let Michigan take all the momentum in the playoffs last year. Granted, obviously Michigan's a lot better than Vandy, but it's the ability to say what you got to say, I don't know, get the team going, whatever, to stifle momentum that is Alabama's problem so far and to not make critical, unforced errors. And Alabama actually didn't do that in this game. And the one interception was bad, and they had one fumble. But penalty-wise, which is historically the last couple seasons been Alabama's main problem, they were actually pretty reserved. They had 6 penalties to Vandy's 3. So, I mean, they did good self-discipline-wise. It was just a matter of getting crucial stops that they didn't get. And we'll see what this does for them up against South Carolina this weekend. The reason I'm doing the podcast on Tuesday is because I will be in town for the South Carolina game as well. So I'm actually going in person to watch this game. I will have firsthand eyewitness accounts of how they play. So I'm excited to be able to talk about that next week. Now, Kalen DeBoer has been having coaching troubles with Alabama this season. We've had some rough patches. Robert Saleh will no longer have to worry about the coaching troubles with the New York Jets because he got fired. This was a surprise to me just because he hasn't even really had time to grow as a Jets head coach. So he's been the coach for the last 3.5 years, and in that time, his first season they went 4-13, not great. Then he improved them 3 games to 7-10, and then last year he was supposed to have Aaron Rodgers. The team was in a way built around Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers got injured within the first 45 seconds of playing, and he maintained the same 7-10 schedule. So far, like I said, they're off to a 2-3 start, so not great, but I don't see the wisdom in firing him so early on into the season when he never really got a chance to grow as head coach. I mean, the one season where he did have a chance to grow, his first like full season as an experienced coach after his first season, he got him 3 extra games. So I don't see the benefit of firing your coach in the middle of the season, especially when, I mean, they're not playing great, but a lot of that hasn't been on him. Aaron Rodgers had 3 interceptions against Minnesota, so I mean that's not his fault. So I don't think that's a good move for the Jets. Jeff Ulbrich has been promoted to the interim head coach for presumably the rest of the season, though I suppose they could fill the vacancy mid-season if they wanted to. I don't see why they would. That would just be way too much change for a team that needs continuity right now after a whole season without their starting quarterback last year. And it is that starting quarterback that people have been pointing the finger to for why Robert Saleh got fired. And I agree. I think it's quite clear that Aaron Rodgers did not like Saleh as a coach and wanted him gone. So week 3, they had a really awkward interaction on the sidelines. Saleh went to hug Aaron Rodgers, and Rodgers straight up just like put his hand up and held him from embracing him and kind of walked off and glared him down afterwards. And then a week or two ago, after a crucial loss, Saleh said that the main reason for the loss, or that one of their biggest issues was the amount of pre-snap penalties, and he thought that they could fix that issue by having the players follow more of Aaron Rodgers' cadence and have Aaron Rodgers lead by example. And he kind of blamed Aaron Rodgers' attitude for the amount of pre-snap penalties. And Aaron Rodgers was asked about that a couple minutes later at the press conference, and he said that alternatively, you could just hold them accountable for the penalties that they create on their own. Now, whatever side of that you agree with, and I would have to agree more with Aaron Rodgers' assessment, I don't see how Aaron Rodgers' body language, cadence, whatever you want to call it, has any effect on whether O lineman goes off sides or not, or commits any sort of pre-snap penalty. That seems to me like you're responsible for your own behavior in that circumstance. But like putting that aside, those aren't the kind of grievances that you air out on a public forum during a press conference unless there are some serious underlying issues in the locker room that you just can't not talk about. I think a lot of people have probably had those situations in their life where they're very frustrated and it's all that nags in the back of your head, and it takes the least provocation for you to find some way to insert that into the conversation. That seems to me to have been the vibe with Robert Saleh when he was asked that question. Clearly, him and Aaron Rodgers have had locker room problems, and there was even that report before the season that Aaron Rodgers has been causing a lot of drama in the Jets locker room. There was the ordeal with him missing his mandatory practice. So, I mean, all the signs point to backstage turmoil that has probably been living rent free in Robert Saleh's head all season. And with him coming out against Aaron Rodgers at the press conference, and Aaron Rodgers clearly not liking him just based on their sideline interaction, and the fact that the reason Aaron Rodgers left Green Bay was because he wanted more of a say in personnel decisions, all points to the fact that he wanted a new coach. He wanted a coach that could be his guy. And if I'm Jeff Ulbrich, I'm not confident in long term me holding on to this head coaching position unless he bases his entire strategy for the rest of the season on kissing butt to Aaron Rodgers. Which, if that's what he's going to do, then more power to him. If you want to get real politic about it, that's probably how Robert Saleh should have approached this situation. If your goal as the Jets head coach in the season is to keep your job and not focus on what you think the best route to do to win games is, then let Aaron Rodgers be the LeBron James of the team. Let him do whatever he wants to. And that way, if things go bad, can't blame me. I'm just doing what our star player said. So, I mean, I can't blame him. I mean, if you're a football coach, you are inherently have a level of ego that probably prevents you from being deferential, one, to your players, and two, just to any, well, you would probably perceive as an outsider because he's only been on the team for one, not even a whole season healthy yet, telling you what to do. But just from a pure job security standpoint, he probably should have known better than to bite the star player's hand in a press conference and to, I don't know, call plays that he didn't like. I'm sure there was some initial spark to why Aaron Rodgers and him didn't get along. A lot of people were criticizing him for playing conservatively, not kind of like we're talking about Vandy and UGA, not going for it on fourth downs and things like that when the situation required. But one thing that surprises me about our current state, if you listen to the analysts and the players talk, everything is all about player empowerment. You know, we're free agents. We can request trades. Who cares how much time's left in our contract? If I'm unhappy, I should be able to choose my own path and go to the team I want to go to, whatever. If I'm Kevin Durant and I want to go to the Warriors as a free agent, like that's my right. Whatever, like player empowerment, it's a great thing. Except for when it becomes time to hold somebody accountable for getting a coach fired. Everybody's all player empowerment until it becomes time to, do some locker room machinations and really flex your muscles behind the scenes. And Aaron Rodgers, or at least the reports coming out, have been from his camp, have been trying to deflect blame off of him for this and say, oh, I'm just a player. I don't call the shots in the locker room. I'm not the general manager. I can't fire people. I just show up to work and play football. Well, I mean, if you're really all about player empowerment, then it should be a good thing that you have the personnel power and clout to get your head coach fired. Why not embrace that and say, yeah, we're in an era of the NFL where if you want to keep your job as a head coach, you have to make your players happy. I mean, if that's the mindset, then go for it. Be out and about it. Don't get your coach fired and then tuck tail and hide behind the GM and use him as a shield and say he's the decision maker at the end of the day. So I think that's a little disingenuous. I'm here nor there on player empowerment, but if you're going to do it, go the whole hog. Why not? Now, the MLB playoffs are ongoing. The Mets are leading the Phillies. They beat the Phillies 7-2 today. And a lot of people are saying it's because of Grimace. Grimace, as in the McDonald's mascot. So, a couple months ago, early in the season, the Mets had Grimace come in and throw out the first pitch at one of their games. And after Grimace came out, the Mets went on a 7-game win streak and got really hot out of nowhere. And then a couple weeks, maybe a month or two down the road, they started to lag again. And so they dedicated a seat in the arena to Grimace. And then they won 6 out of their next 7 games. And so they've embraced Grimace as an unofficial mascot, at least for this postseason run. Grimace was at the game today. He had a subway train dedicated to him on the way to Citi Field. So we'll see if Grimace can be the good luck charm that fuels the Mets Cinderella story. But today they really did just put a hurting on the Yankees pretty consistently, and it wasn't really that they had a great hitting game or a great pitching game. It was just good all around baseball. I mean, the Phillies only got 5 hits the entire game. The Mets got 9. 2 of them were home runs. I mean, it was just good baseball all around. And if the Mets put the Phillies out, that would be a huge upset, just period. And also would be another example of a first or top seeded team getting put out after a bye week. And that would really, feed more fuel to the fire that the bye week is not all that it's cracked up to be. And it would also put the Mets en route to potentially a great Cinderella story. So if the Mets, the first round of the MLB playoffs is a 5-game series, the Mets are up 2-1 against the Phillies, which is like the best team in baseball this season. So, I mean, they could end up in LCS waiting to play either the Dodgers or the Padres. Now, that series is also tied. They're currently playing right now. And so far, this series has been a real knockdown dragout. They had a really tense matchup that ended with Dodgers fans throwing trash onto the field at Padres players the last game. It got so bad that Jeremiah Estrada said that Game 5, Estrada plays for the Padres. He's a relief pitcher for them. He said Game 5 should be played somewhere else because that the Dodger Stadium is an unsafe work environment, essentially. There was somebody threw a bottle that almost hit a Padres player in the head, and that's just ridiculous. At the end of the day, I don't care how much alcohol you have in your system. Like, if you're a grown person, there is no reason ever to throw a glass bottle at another person's head, much less over a sporting event. That's just ridiculous, unacceptable, should be banned from Dodger Stadium for a long time, if not permanently, for that kind of behavior. That being said, too, though, I do think some of the Padres players were pearl clutching a little bit about the kind of trash that was being thrown. Like, it's one thing to throw like bottles and glass and batteries and things like that can do serious damage. But if somebody's throwing a plastic cup or I don't know, like napkin, like just regular like debris, like folded up paper and things like that, I'm not saying whether or not it's a safety hazard. I've never been hit by a bottle, by not bottle, but like I've never been hit by a plastic cup full of Coca-Cola from like 10, 15 feet above my head, but it does make for a good visual. And there are a lot of good classic sports moments, especially in pro wrestling, like when you had Hulk Hogan turn heel with the NWO, and there was just trash in the ring. Like, I don't know, it just shows a level of heatedness that just makes it more interesting. And at the end of the day, like that sort of like non serious stuff being thrown, I think there's a distinction to be made there that a lot of people don't make when it comes to talking about this. Like throwing glasses and stuff that can do serious damage, horrible. Throwing paper and like soft food like popcorn and Coke cups, not great. I'm not saying it's great. I would never do something like that, but it's not the end of the world. So, I mean, we'll see how the game goes tonight, if they can keep their tempers down. But just on the way the dialogue around this series is circulating right now, I would not be surprised if there's some tense interactions in this game tonight. Manny Machado kind of threw a ball at the Dodgers dugout last game. It hit the net. He says that he was just tossing the ball back to the ball boy, but the Dodgers manager said that he felt there was intent behind it, and he was lucky that the net was there. So it's just tensions are high in California right now. Hopefully, there's no bench clearing brawls or anything like that this series, but I'll say that to say if the level of play and competition gets as heated as the verbal altercations have been and the fan emotions has been, then it bodes very well for the Mets because this is 5 games and the Mets can beat the Phillies and have a little bit of time to rest, maybe not a whole week because apparently that's not good for the first seeded teams. Then the Dodgers, the Padres, whoever wins that, could come out emotionally and physically drained. And maybe the Mets can make a World Series run. I can never root for somebody, not the Braves in the NL East, but there is the morbid curiosity side in me that wants to see just how far the Mets can take this Cinderella story. So we'll see. The Yankees and the Royals are tied at 1 game apiece, as are the Guardians and the Tigers. So, verdict is out on how that will go. I'm picking the Yankees and the Guardians to win that series. Logic would dictate that. Current play would dictate that. However, if the curse of the bye week strikes again, then I will never pick a first seed again or top 1-2 seed again as long as there's a bye week. Now, on to WWE. We had Bad Blood on Saturday. Not the Taylor Swift song, the WWE pay-per-view that has been brought back for the first time in 20 years to commemorate the 27th anniversary of the first Hell in a Cell match between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker that took place at In Your House Bad Blood 1997. Small little note here, the original Bad Blood pay-per-view, they actually spelled bad with 2 B's in the word just because it was the late 90s and spelling things wrong for stylistic purposes was the way to go. But after that 1 year, they kept it just BAD, regular spelling of bad. After that, I was a little bit confused when I was seeing the pay-per-view that it was only spelled with 1 D, so I had to go back and research, like, when did they drop the second D? That second D was only there for the first show. Nobody that's not a wrestling aficionado would care about that, but just a little fun fact I thought I would point out on the show. There was just something about 1997 to like 2005 and spelling things wrong was just so cool. Like all the tag teams, you had like Boys was spelled with a Z, N was spelled just the letter N, like Boys to or not Boys to Men, like Boys in the Hood, just like the letter N. Not that that was from that time period, but just like generally speaking, spelling things wrong, there was a time when that was cool. Now with text language and everything, it's just the norm. But I thought it was a pretty top heavy show in that the first and the last match were really good. Everything else in between, you could have skipped. So the big debate going into the show was what would be the main event. CM Punk and Drew McIntyre in Hell in a Cell, or Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes teaming up for the first time to take on Solo Sikoa and Jacob Fatu. And the general consensus was that the Hell in a Cell match would main event unless there was going to be a big surprise at the end of the tag team match that would warrant the tag team match going on last. And a couple of days before the show, rumors started going around that The Rock might show up. And people pretty much said, okay, if the tag team match goes on last and there's going to be some sort of big return, most likely The Rock. And that is exactly what happened. Hell in a Cell opened the show. Tag team match ended. And within the last minute and a half of the show, music hits. The Rock's theme song plays. He comes out and stares down Cody Rhodes and The Rock, or Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns, gave him the eyebrow, counted down to 3, slashed his throat, and that was that for the show. So the Hell in a Cell match, I thought, was the best match of the night, and one of the best Hell in a Cell matches that WWE has put on since the end of an era Triple H versus Undertaker match from WrestleMania 28. There was actual blood, like legit, intense blood in this match that has not been seen in this company since 2008, if not a little bit before that. And that is something that Hell in a Cell matches need. Wrestling, it's scripted. Everybody knows it's scripted. However, what makes wrestling special is the ability just for a second to make you suspend disbelief and buy into what you are seeing in front of your eyes. And having Hell in a Cell matches with no blood just is silly. If you're in a giant steel structure with somebody you hate, and you're throwing chairs and tables and kendo sticks and sledgehammers and steel steps, and you're grinding each other's heads against a steel cage, how on earth are you not even going to get a little bit of a scratch on your forehead? It's not realistic. And as much realism as possible as you can put into a fake sport, the better. So not only did CM Punk and Drew McIntyre not get a little bit of a scratch on their forehead, they bladed, which in wrestling terms, blading is when you take a knife or usually a razor or something and you slash your own forehead. And it's how a lot of people think when wrestlers bleed is fake blood. It's not, it is real blood. They just have a certain area on their head that if you're taught how to wrestle, they show you where you can cut to just give yourself a flesh wound. It makes it look like a nasty cut, but it's not like serious damage. And so that is what wrestlers do when they bleed. And there were a couple spots in this match that I wanted to highlight. Uh, so CM Punk was the first one to get busted open in the match. He just got launched into the cage in Hell in a Cell. And at that point, I kind of figured he was going to blade after that. So going into the match, actually, both CM Punk and Drew McIntyre promised to make the other bleed. So that was kind of WWE's way of signaling that there was going to be bleeding in this match. And when CM Punk got launched into the steel part of the cell, I was like, okay, this is where the blading is going to happen. And sure enough, they cut to Drew McIntyre so they wouldn't. A lot of times when wrestlers blade, it's pretty obvious if you know what to look for, what they're doing. And so they put the camera on McIntyre so they wouldn't have CM Punk blading on screen. And sure enough, they cut the camera back to CM Punk, and he's got a gusher on his forehead. And it just went from there. Drew McIntyre controlled pretty handily the first portion of the match until CM Punk got a little bit of an edge. The next big spot happened when Drew McIntyre, whenever he made CM Punk bleed and Punk was down in the corner, he went and he got a toolbox out from under the ring and used a wrench to get CM Punk in the forehead as a way to like cut open his wound and just made it for a real intense visual. But so that put a toolbox out on the corner of the ring. And then later on in the match, CM Punk got thrown to the outside and he grabbed the toolbox and Drew McIntyre didn't notice that. So he went down to grab CM Punk and pull him back up. And CM Punk just kind of like whacks him over the top of the head with the toolbox. And the thud that toolbox made when it hit Drew McIntyre in the head, I mean, it made a heck of a sound. And it made, like, I don't know how they managed to pull it off. I mean, he really did hit Drew McIntyre in the head. I'm assuming there was like the toolbox was gimmicked in some way, or the way he hit him was at a certain part of the head. Wrestlers have talked about this, how there's a part on your head apparently if you hit somebody in the head with a steel chair with it, it like is less dangerous than other parts. So either he hit Drew McIntyre on that sweet spot where it makes a great sound, but the impact isn't as bad, or the toolbox was gimmicked. Either way, they cut back to CM Punk, and it's like, okay, this is where Drew McIntyre is going to be bleeding now. And they cut back to Drew McIntyre, and he just has a crimson mask on his face. And not gonna lie, for a split second, as bad as it was, I thought that maybe he cut a little too deep on his blade job and might have pulled an Eddie Guerrero from No Way Out 2004. That anybody that's ever seen that match, or if you haven't and you're not squeamish, Google pictures of it. It's pretty gruesome. So I was a little bit concerned for Drew McIntyre for a couple seconds there, but then he continued on like he was fine and he seemed like he had his bearings about him. So they went on. There was a really awesome table spot in the match too, where Drew McIntyre just tosses CM Punk off the corner through a table that had been set up around the cell. And the other two big spots from the match, going into this, CM Punk, it had been a big deal that he had a little beaded bracelet with his wife and his dog's name on it. Drew McIntyre ripped the bracelet up and stuffed the beads down CM Punk's mouth. And so a point towards the end of the match, CM Punk was down. Drew McIntyre goes under the ring and pulls out a black little baggie. And anybody that's watched a lot of wrestling knows that what's generally in bags that look like that are thumbtacks. And when he first pulled that out, I was like, oh my gosh, they're going to do a thumbtack spot? They're really taking this hardcore thing seriously. But then Drew McIntyre starts dumping out the bag, and instead of thumbtacks, it's beads. And he starts shoving the beads in CM Punk's mouth again as like a callback. But CM Punk ended up flipping it around, getting the upper hand. He takes McIntyre down, ends up taking a steel chain, wrapping it around Punk. Punk wraps it around his own knee, hits Drew McIntyre with the go to sleep, which is a little move where he just hits Drew McIntyre in the face with his knee after dropping him off his shoulders and knees him in the face with a chain. That's the end of the match. That's the end of the feud, and this will be the feud of the year. As far as I'm concerned, it's just been great all the way around. The intensity is something that has not been seen on WWE TV in a long time, and it's something that I love to see. I mean, good old fashioned hatred. If that's the name of the Georgia Tech rivalry, it is also could be a good name for the CM Punk Drew McIntyre rivalry. The main event though, with Roman and Cody and the Bloodline, it was good. Not as many high spots. I think the spot that stuck out the most to me was Cody jumping off the top rope and putting Jacob Fatu through the announce table. And it was really funny. Before Cody jumped off the top rope, he kind of saluted at Roman, and it was a really cool spot. I liked it. A callback too because Jacob Fatu made his debut by doing the same move to Cody and putting him through the announce table. So Cody kind of got his revenge. One thing I didn't like and just generally don't like about some wrestling matches, it goes back to what I was saying about the suspension of disbelief. Whenever there's a tag team match or a ladder match for that matter, and there's always, every single time without fail, a spot where somebody's in a tag team match and they're getting pummeled on and pummeled on and pummeled on, and it's like, oh, can he get to the ropes? Can he tag in his partner? And somehow he frees himself up and he gets a big move, like both guys in the ring are down, and he starts working his way towards his partner. And it's like, oh, can he get there? And it is so corny when the wrestler is in the middle of the ring and his opponent or his partner is 10 feet away and he's reaching his hand out trying to get the tag, and it's good and well, you're looking at him, he's not an arm length away. Stop sticking your hand out and trying to get the tag when you can't reach him. Run over there and tag in. So that's just always a stupid spot. It always bugs me. And it depends on how far away you are. There are some times it can work where it's he's trying to reach out to his partner, but the other guy in the ring is pulling him by the other hand, and that can be okay. But Cody Rhodes, he was the one who was getting beat down for a good portion of the match, and he just kept reaching for Roman when he was just 10 feet away, and it was just silly. And it's the same way in ladder matches when somebody's climbing the ladder, but they're not supposed to win, but they also have to kill time before whoever's supposed to interrupt them comes up and does it. And so they climb up the ladder and they're climbing and they're 2 steps up, and the belt or the briefcase that they're reaching for is 10 feet up in the air, and they're already reaching for it. And then they stop and they go up one more and they reach for it again. And then they stop and they go up and they reach for it one more time. And it's dude, you're taking me out of the realism here. Climb up to the ladder and do it. And if you're not supposed to win, if this isn't the end of the match, then whoever's supposed to interrupt you needs to hop to it, because you look stupid right now, reaching for something that is way above your head. So, minor digression, but that did kind of bug me throughout the match when they kept doing that. But after the match, so Cody and Roman win. The Rock's music hits. So the way they won was the Tongans came out, Tama Tonga and Tongaloa, and they were beating on Roman Reigns, or about to, I should say. And then all of a sudden, Jey Uso, or not even Jey Uso. So you see the Tongans approaching the ring, and it cuts to Roman looking at him, staring him down, and it cuts back, and you see somebody in a hoodie and a bandana around his face. So you can't see who it is until he yanks off the bandana and the hoodie, and you see it's Jey Uso, who hasn't been seen since the week after WrestleMania. So it's been like 5, 6 months now when he got beat down by Tama Tonga. And he came out and he super kicked Tama Tonga and Tongaloa, went in, super kicked or like helped Roman beat up Solo, and then Roman got the pin. Him and him and Jimmy hug, and they go to leave, and then the Bloodline starts beating down Cody in the ring, and then Jimmy looks at Roman and says, "Hey man, you gave him your word you'd help him," and Roman was like, "Nah, like I told him that was good as long as the match lasts. The match is over. He's on his own." And then Jimmy is like, "All right, you're the tribal chief. You're my tribal chief at least. Whatever you say goes." And Roman has a change of heart. They come out and they beat off the Bloodline together. And then they're all celebrating in the ring, and that's when The Rock comes out. And he raises his eyebrow. And then he does 1, 2, 3, and he does that. And then he walks out, and the show is over. So the big question is, who is he giving the throat slash to, and why did he raise the eyebrow? If I had to guess, he raised the eyebrow at Roman because Roman just beat up his own family to protect Cody Rhodes, who just a couple months ago was insulting their family and their number one enemy, and is the one that took Roman's championship from him at WrestleMania. And I think he was doing the 1, 2, 3 throat slash to Cody as a way to signify that his days as champion are numbered. So The Rock coming back in this bloodline angle is huge because last we saw, The Rock had acknowledged Roman Reigns as his tribal chief, and then Roman lost the title at WrestleMania. And Solo, the next week on SmackDown, came out and said losing has consequences, and he kicked Jimmy out of the bloodline, and he took over as tribal chief. So, one, we have not seen what The Rock thought about Roman losing to Cody at WrestleMania. Was The Rock the one that told Solo Sikoa that he should take over running things in the bloodline? Was he the one that put that little seed in Solo's head? Does The Rock think that he should be the tribal chief now because he beat Cody at WrestleMania and Roman and Solo have both lost to Cody? So there's a lot of different ways The Rock could fit into the situation. I think it would be more interesting if The Rock was the one that's been pulling the strings with Solo's hostile takeover this whole time, and that Solo has been calling himself the tribal chief, but really he's just been keeping the seat warm until The Rock comes back, and that he will acknowledge The Rock as his tribal chief, and the story goes on from there. But it could go anywhere, and I'm excited to see how it shakes out. The Rock coming back is just what this Bloodline story needed. It makes it exciting again. It makes me wonder when we're going to get Cody versus The Rock, because it feels like that's a matchup we have to have. The way The Rock was last time we saw him and Cody were having a tug of war had a belt swap. So that's a match that feels like it has to happen. It's just, does it happen at this year's WrestleMania, or is this year's WrestleMania going to be Rock versus Roman, and Cody versus The Rock happens on the way there? So that remains to be seen. And on that note, that will be a wrap on this week's episode. I will see y'all next week with a live in-person report from Tuscaloosa to let y'all know what it was like being there for the South Carolina game. So see y'all next time.